In the annals of crime, one name resonates like no other: Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria. From modest beginnings in the small Colombian town of Rionegro, Escobar would rise to become the most notorious drug lord in history. His reign, marked by power, terror, and devastation, would leave an indelible mark on Colombia and the world. From his early forays into crime to the creation of the formidable Medellín Cartel, his journey was a chilling testament to the destructive power of ambition, unbound by morality. This is the story of that journey, an odyssey through a world where power, fear, and violence were the currency of survival. In the small town of Rionegro, nestled in the Colombian department of Antioquia, Pablo Escobar was born on December 1, 1949, to Abel de Jus Dari Escobar, a farmer, and Hermilda Gaviria, a schoolteacher. He was the third of 7 children, growing up in an environment of modest means. Despite the financial constraints, his parents instilled in him a strong sense of ambition and a relentless pursuit of better circumstances. Escobar's early years were marked by a peculiar blend of charm and cunning, traits that would later define his life and legacy. He was a charismatic child, with a knack for persuasion and a flair for leadership. But even in his early years, there was a darker side to his character. He was known to be manipulative, and his ambition often blurred the lines between right and wrong. Growing up, Pablo was exposed to the harsh socio-economic conditions of Colombia. The stark income inequality, with a wide gap between a wealthy elite and an impoverished majority, may have influenced his path into crime. His early entrepreneurial ventures, such as selling contraband cigarettes and fake lottery tickets, were perhaps early indicators of his willingness to operate outside the law to achieve wealth. Pablo attended Universidad Autónoma Latinoamericana in Medellín for a brief period. However, the confines of formal education couldn't hold his burgeoning ambition for long. Leaving university partway, he dove headfirst into a life of crime. A journey that began with small-time illegal activities soon escalated into something much larger and far more dangerous. When Pablo was in his late teens, he made a decision that would set the course for the rest of his life. He was drawn to the allure of quick money and the power it could bring. His departure from formal education marked the beginning of his life of crime. The young man from Rionegro began his journey, not knowing that he would one day become the most notorious drug lord in the world, the king of the Medellín Cartel, Pablo Escobar. His early years bore witness to the making of a man who would leave an indelible mark on the world, for better or worse. In the 1970s, Pablo Escobar, alongside his cousin Gustavo Gaviria Rivero, began to climb the ranks of the criminal underworld. They transitioned from small-scale illegal activities to something much larger and far more dangerous: the drug trade. Initially, they smuggled marijuana, but it was the introduction of cocaine that catapulted their operation to unprecedented heights. By the mid-1970s, Pablo and Gustavo began producing cocaine themselves. They set up narcotics processing facilities in secluded regions of Colombia and initiated the large-scale smuggling of cocaine into the United States. Their operation rapidly expanded, and by the late 1970s, they had become major players in the drug trade. The Medellín Cartel, which they established, was not just a two-man operation. It had a complex organizational structure, involving numerous players who handled various aspects of the business, from production and transportation to security and bribery. Their business model was simple: plata o plomo, silver or lead. This chilling mantra meant that government officials and law enforcement were offered a choice between taking a bribe or facing assassination. The success of their operations led to an immense accumulation of wealth. By the time of his death, Pablo Escobar would amass an estimated net worth of $30 billion, making him one of the wealthiest criminals in history. In the midst of his escalating criminal activities, Pablo maintained a personal life. In 1976, he married Maria Victoria Henao, and they would go on to have 2 children, Juan Pablo and Manuela. Despite his growing power and influence in the underworld, Pablo sought semblances of a normal family life. Other key figures in the cartel included Carlos Letter, a transportation expert who revolutionized drug smuggling, and the Ochoa brothers, who were instrumental in expanding the cartel's operations. The cartel's influence extended deep into the political and law enforcement institutions in Colombia through a network of corruption and intimidation. Despite his brutal reign and criminal activities, Pablo harbored political ambitions. He yearned for acceptance in Colombia's high society and aspired to become more than just a kingpin. He sought political legitimacy and even managed to get elected as an alternate member of Colombia's Congress in 1982. However, his criminal activities were exposed, leading to his expulsion from Congress in 1983. This public humiliation served as a catalyst for an even more violent chapter in Pablo's life, setting the stage for the war against extradition. The 1980s marked the height of Pablo Escobar's power. The Medellín Cartel, under his leadership, was controlling more than 80% of the cocaine smuggled into the United States. His illicit success earned Pablo a spot as one of the world's richest men, amassing an estimated net worth of $30 billion. Despite the brutal reign and criminal activities, Pablo was seen as a Robin Hood-like figure by many in Medellín. He built houses, schools, and hospitals for the poor, earning him a near-heroic status among the city's impoverished residents. To them, he was a modern-day Robin Hood, a man who stole from the rich and gave to the poor. However, this public persona was a stark contrast to the reality of his operations. The Medellín Cartel was notorious for its ruthlessness. Pablo's mantra of plata o plomo, silver or lead, was not just a threat, but a promise. Those who stood in his way were offered a choice, a bribe or a bullet. This policy extended beyond the cartel, reaching into the realms of politics and law enforcement. His empire was built on a foundation of corruption, fear, and bloodshed. The rise of Pablo Escobar was a testament to his charisma, ambition, and ruthlessness. From a small-time smuggler to the leader of the world's most powerful drug cartel, Pablo's journey was marked by violence, power, and an insatiable desire for wealth. His reign, however, was about to face challenges that would shake the very foundations of his empire. As the 1980s neared their end, the once seemingly invincible Pablo Escobar found himself increasingly cornered. His illicit operations, previously concealed within the dark corners of Colombia's underworld, were now exposed to the relentless scrutiny of the international community. His aspirations for political legitimacy had backfired dramatically, revealing his criminal history to the world. His expulsion from the Colombian Congress in 1983 was more than just a personal humiliation. It was a public challenge thrown at the Colombian government and its allies. On a broader level, it brought the issue of drug trafficking and corruption into the public and political spotlight. However, looming larger than any challenge was the specter of extradition to the United States. The U.S. had been relentless in its pressure on the Colombian government to extradite known drug traffickers for prosecution. But for Pablo, extradition was a fate far worse than death. He was acutely aware that he wouldn't be able to manipulate the U.S. justice system as he had done with Colombia's. The thought of spending the remainder of his life in a U.S. prison was a nightmare he was desperate to evade. In response to this existential threat, Pablo launched a brutal campaign against extradition. His strategy was twofold: to instill fear through a relentless spree of violence, and to sway public opinion through populist rhetoric. This campaign of terror, known as narco-terrorism, involved bombings, assassinations, and kidnappings, plunging Colombia into a state of chaos. His message was clear: anyone who supported extradition was a target. While Escobar unleashed violence, he also embarked on a public relations campaign to win the hearts and minds of Colombians. He positioned himself as a champion of the poor, building houses and distributing wealth in impoverished neighborhoods. This approach garnered him a dedicated base of support among certain segments of the Colombian population, adding another layer of complexity to the government's attempts to prosecute him. However, the tide was beginning to turn against Pablo. The relentless violence and escalating death toll were not without consequences. The Colombian public's patience was wearing thin, and the international community, particularly the United States, was growing increasingly impatient. The U.S. ramped up its support for Colombian law enforcement, providing resources, intelligence, and training. Among those sent to Colombia were DEA agents Steve Murphy and Javier Pina, who would play a crucial role in the manhunt for Pablo Escobar. Meanwhile, Pablo was facing threats from multiple fronts. The Colombian police, under increasing pressure to curb drug trafficking, were constantly on his heels. The U.S. government, affected by the influx of cocaine into the country, was pushing for his extradition. Additionally, his rival, the Cali cartel, posed a significant threat, as they were competing for control over the lucrative drug trade. As the decade came to a close, Pablo's empire began to show cracks. His once unassailable position was weakening, and his war against extradition was becoming increasingly desperate. The assassination of Luis Carlos Galán, a popular presidential candidate and an outspoken critic of the cartels, marked a significant escalation in the conflict. His death, widely attributed to Escobar, caused public opinion to turn decisively against him, leading to a hardening of the government's stance against the cartels. The stage was set for a final showdown. The once untouchable kingpin was now the most wanted man in Colombia, and his downfall was imminent. The dawn of the 1990s marked the beginning of the end for Pablo Escobar. His war against extradition had wreaked havoc in Colombia, leading to a public outcry against the violence perpetrated by the Medellín Cartel. His attempts to position himself as a Colombian patriot were failing, as the public grew weary of the bloodshed and chaos. The international community, particularly the United States, was also taking notice, putting increasing pressure on the Colombian government to put an end to Escobar's reign of terror. In a desperate bid to avoid extradition, Pablo brokered a deal with the Colombian government in 1991. He agreed to surrender and serve a prison term in Colombia, with the condition that he would not be extradited. The prison, known as La Catedral, was more of a luxurious private resort than a penitentiary. However, Pablo continued his criminal activities, living in comfort while the government turned a blind eye. When the government discovered that Pablo was still running his criminal empire from prison, they decided to move him to a standard prison. Forewarned, Pablo escaped before they could transfer him, triggering a nationwide manhunt for Colombia's most wanted man. Pablo was on the run for 16 months. His resources were dwindling, and his allies were turning against him. The death of his cousin and right-hand man, Gustavo Gaviria, in 1990 had dealt a significant blow to the Medellín Cartel and to Pablo personally. With the relentless pursuit by the Colombian National Police, assisted by DEA agents Steve Murphy and Javier Pina, Pablo was running out of options. In December 1993, Pablo Escobar was finally cornered in a middle-class neighborhood in Medellín. In a shootout with the Colombian National Police, he was killed, bringing an end to his reign of terror. The fall of the kingpin marked the end of an era in Colombia's history, an era marked by fear, violence, and the relentless pursuit of power. The death of Pablo Escobar marked the end of a bloody chapter in Colombia's history. His reign of terror had left deep scars on the nation, and his absence created a power vacuum in the underworld. The Medellín Cartel, once a formidable force in the global drug trade, began to crumble without its leader. Different factions within the Medellín Cartel itself started to vie for control over its lucrative drug trafficking routes and operations. Key figures within the cartel, who had their own followers and resources, started to assert their claims. This internal power struggle led to a period of intense violence and instability as these factions clashed with each other. At the same time, rival cartels saw an opportunity to expand their own territories and influence. The most notable of these was the Cali cartel, which had been the primary competitor during Escobar's lifetime. The Cali cartel and other emerging criminal groups sought to take over the Medellín cartel's drug trafficking routes and operations, leading to further violence and instability. This period marked a significant shift in the Colombian drug trade, with power dynamics changing and new players emerging. Despite the downfall of Escobar and the disintegration of the Medellín cartel, the demand for cocaine remained high, ensuring that the drug trade in Colombia continued to thrive. In Colombia, the government faced the monumental task of healing a nation scarred by decades of violence. Efforts were made to dismantle the remaining factions of the cartel and to crack down on the drug trade. However, the legacy of Pablo Escobar continued to cast a long shadow over the country. Even in death, Escobar remained a controversial figure. To some, he was a ruthless criminal and a terrorist. To others, especially in the poorer neighborhoods of Medellín, he was a Robin Hood figure who fought against the establishment. The tale of Pablo Escobar is a chilling saga of ambition, power, and violence. It's a stark testament to the devastating impact of the drug trade on a nation and its people. His story serves as a grim reminder of the human cost of unchecked ambition and the destructive allure of power. As the echoes of gunfire fade and the smoke of a long-lost war clears, the ghost of Escobar lingers on. He is a chilling testament to a time when a man became a king became a legend, and a legend became a monster. Even decades after his death, the specter of Escobar serves as a stark reminder of the devastation wrought by his reign of terror, a painful scar etched deep in the heart of Colombia.